Hey, they don't make them like they used to, carnal. Growing up mixed race, you're always caught between two worlds. So when we talk about representation, what are we actually talking about? Well, if we're talking about Hollywood, they've done a piss poor job for decades representing Latinos and Chicanos. But around the 80s and 90s, things started to change. We had Latino and Chicano films made for us and by us. We were finally starting to get our own voices on screen, and none better than 1995's My Family, or Mi Familia. It's a film that spans 3 generations about the immigrant experience and building a life in the United States. And 30 years later, what it represents and what it tells us about what we've lost in Hollywood is vital to understanding the Chicano experience on film. My Family is the epic American saga of the Sanchez family. Jose Sanchez spends a year walking on foot from Mexico to Los Angeles. There, he meets Maria, who becomes the love of his life. Jose is played by Jacob Vargas, and Maria is played by a young Jennifer Lopez. Soon they're married and have their first child. But through circumstances, Maria is deported, and she herself has to make the arduous journey back to LA and to her love. Some 20 years later, they have 5 children. Chucho, the eldest, played by Isa Morales, rejects his family history. He wants to be a modern man. He just wants to dance mambo and make money. And he doesn't always do that in the most legal way, which leads him into trouble and ultimately alters the entire course of his family. 30 years later, in the 1980s, little Jimmy is all grown up, and after a family tragedy, he has grown hard and strong, doing a stint in prison for armed robbery. Jimmy is played by Jimmy Smits, and once out, he's propositioned by his sister Tony to help save the life of a Salvadoran woman, played by Elpidia Carrillo. He begrudgingly agrees to an arranged marriage to get her a green card, but soon they actually fall in love for this arrangement. And Jimmy has to navigate not only his feelings, but his past trauma, which eventually leads him to a strained relationship with his own son. All the while, Marie and Jose watch their family grow, change, and struggle all the way into the 90s. My Family was directed by Gregory Nava. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he did a few other Chicano classics. His first film was El Norte, a classic of Latin American cinema. And after My Family, Hollywood came calling, and Nava directed the Selena biopic with Jennifer Lopez. And Nava's direction here, his warmth and his empathy behind the camera, is why we say representation matters, because it's his lived experience, along with the Chicano actors, that gives this such a sense of authenticity and specific detail. From minute one, we get the sense that there is real history and trauma and truth embedded in this story. The film is narrated by Edward James Olmos, who plays the grown-up Paco. And through these 3 distinct time periods, we get a sense, maybe not of the entire Chicano experience, but an incredible cross-section of what it means to be Latino in America. You see, contrary to the culture now and how it identifies Latinos and Chicanos, it's not all just about the immigrant experience, though that is one part of it. Nava's film is saying, while it might not be easy, it takes many generations to get over our past struggles and to find compassion to really continue the values that our families have instilled with us. It's really through these 3 experiences in one film that My Family represents really the apotheosis of the Chicano experience on film, and especially at this time period, the 80s and 90s. Of course, it wasn't the first. Many cite the late 1970s film Boulevard Nights for ushering in the modern Chicano film. Boulevard Nights is set in East Los Angeles, and it follows 2 brothers, one who's trying to stay in the straight and narrow, and one who's always getting into crime. And while it's a rough around the edges film, it gives you an idea of not only what Chicanos were facing in LA, in America, in the 70s, but of cultural signifiers that would carry on throughout other Chicano films. And here's where we get into Edward James Olmos, who really spearheaded these types of films, especially in the early 80s with Zoot Suit, a film chronicling the Zoot Suit riots and how Latino youths were persecuted by the police and put on trial for crimes they didn't commit. Olmos would go on to do other Chicano films, The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, and the classic Stand and Deliver, as the teacher Jaime Escalante, who mentors troubled youths in Los Angeles. And a troubled youth in that film starred in another Chicano classic, La Bamba, starring Lou Diamond Phillips. The thing about Lou Diamond Phillips is he's not Chicano, and we all found that out many years later. We give a lot of leeway for representation, so because Phillips really embodied Richie Valles, he's kind of cemented himself in the Latino Hall of Fame. So Lou Diamond Phillips, you get a pass from us. But once we get to the 90s, the Chicano film took on rougher edges. The 90s were really signified in the Chicano community by gangs and gang violence. Well, at least if you watch movies. And it's here where Edward James Olmos turned his lens on other stories. Specifically, his directorial debut in 1992, American Me. It's a hard-hitting prison drama based on a true story, where Olmos plays Santana, a gang leader who does 18 years in prison, and when he comes out, he has to face the challenges of starting a new life while being pulled back into a life of crime. Almost made this as a statement to expose what Chicano youth were going through, to show the corruption and recidivism of the prison industrial complex in America, and to not shy away from the darker sides of masculinity within the Chicano communities. And in that way, 1993's Blood In, Blood Out was another classic of the genre. In the same way that Mi Familia was an epic with 3 generations, Blood In, Blood Out follows 3 brothers on different tracks. One brother who falls to a life of crime, one brother who decides to uphold the law as a police officer, and the other brother in the middle who decides to devote his life to his art. And while Blood In, Blood Out was embraced by the Chicano community and starred Chicano actors, it does have a complicated legacy, being directed by a white man, Taylor Hackford, and also propagating some stereotypes we have about Chicanos that remain to this day. But if Blood In, Blood Out seemed like a negative depiction of Chicanos, Selena by Gregory Nava was the most positive depiction we could hope to get. And almost 30 years later, Selena, as personified by Jennifer Lopez, has really become a classic for us. It's not just the film that we all watched in Spanish class growing up, it's a heartfelt and incredibly accurate portrait of the Tejano superstar whose life was cut way too short. J-Lo is Puerto Rican, she's not Mexican like Selena, but she does such an incredible job embodying the physicality and the sweetness and warmth of Selena. She nails that superstar charisma that Selena had, and it's why J-Lo gets a pass from the Chicano community. Though given J-Lo's career now, we all really miss when she used to be Latina. There were a number of smaller Chicano films in the 90s that gained cult followings. The Wonderful Ice Cream Suit, based on a play, also starred Edward James Olmos. Mi Vida Loca looked at Latino struggles, but through a female lens. And Paul Rodriguez, a popular comedian of the time, got to lead his own comedy, A Million to One, where a lowly orange seller wins the lottery. But by the late 90s, Chicano films would be winding down. In the 2000s, the Chicano film went by the wayside. Luckily, there was Real Women Have Curves, which introduced us to America Ferrera, a story about an East LA teen dealing with her overbearing mother and trying to achieve her dreams outside of what her family expects. There was also Tortilla Soup, a remake of Ang Lee's Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. When I talk about Chicano films, I'm not necessarily talking about Latin American films, but I can shout out Sin Nombre, directed by Cary Fukunaga, which is about teenagers in Mexico trying to escape gang violence. Fortunately, in 2011, we got another Oscar-nominated film, A Better Life, starring Demian Bashir, as a father trying to do best by his son, but who runs up against immigration enforcement. Bashir was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor, and he gives a powerful performance as a father who has done everything, and yet, because of American laws and politics, just doesn't seem to be able to do enough for his child. But sadly, the 2010s were slim pickings for Chicano representation. Now, we did get some actors who blew up around that time. Michael Pena, he did a sensitive portrayal of a Chicano worker in the Oscar-nominated Crash, and he went on to lead a biopic of Cesar Chavez. And you can look at this time as good or bad. The good is we started getting more representation of Latinos in Hollywood films. But the stories have been few and far between. Every now and then you get your sports drama, McFarland USA, you get your biopic, Flamin' Hot, or you get your stereotypical film no one remembers, like Lowriders. And yes, I'm actually saying this, DC's Blue Beetle. It not only starred young new Latino talent, but an array of classic Chicano actors, George Lopez, Raul Castillo, Elpidia Carrillo, and it was because of this representation and specificity around a kid becoming a superhero that the film actually worked. That specificity separated this from all the other comic book slop and gave it a liveliness and an energy that I was surprised by when I saw it. I really do think this was one of the best Chicano representation movies we've gotten of the last 20 years. And I'm going to be honest, George Lopez is awesome in this. He steals every scene. We'll throw him on the Chicano Hall of Fame. I'm going to give a quick shout out to the El Mariachi trilogy, which kind of stands outside a strict Chicano movie. Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi was a giant indie success. He made it for only $3,000 or something, and it led him to Desperado, which was not only a breakout film for him, but for Antonio Banderas in the United States. Now, I know Banderas is Spanish, but he's Andalusian, and you can't really look at him and hear him and tell me he's like a white European Spaniard. He's just as suave and as sensitive to the portrayal of the Mexican Desperado that he carved out his own place in Hollywood, especially in The Mask of Zorro, where he played the legendary character and just blows the doors off. It is an amazing movie star performance. He's playing a Mexican character. I know he's Spanish, but he does it so well. He is an honorary Chicano, no ifs, ands, or buts. Rodriguez is an interesting filmmaker in that he puts a lot of Chicanos in his films, but he doesn't front-load those stories. And while a lot of those stories don't always make the best movies, he has a lot of misses in his filmography. He has done a lot for representation in Hollywood. Shout out Robert Rodriguez. Which brings us all back to My Family and why it resonates so much 30 years later. Not only was it a VHS classic for Chicano families, it represents a period when Chicano narratives were new on screen and everything felt possible. It felt like we were at the forefront of breaking stereotypes and telling new stories. And as a kid growing up, and while not being able to see these movies because I was so young, I still saw the TV spots. I still saw these actors on talk shows. I still saw part of myself represented on TV. And that mattered for me going forward as an actor, as a filmmaker. My Family ultimately gives us the breadth of the Chicano experience in America. Now, one note. A majority of these films take place in Los Angeles. The idea of what Chicanos are has been shaped by movies set in LA. So going forward, I think we need to represent more the Chicano experience in Texas. We have a wealth of culture here that's just waiting to be immortalized on film. And here's hoping that new generations will experience a classic like My Family, make new films about Chicanos, and we will get new classics in the future. 30 years later, My Family is a classic of Chicano cinema. It's heartfelt and powerful and still resonates to this day. It's a vital piece of Chicano and Latino representation on film. I give it an essential 4.5 stars out of 5. If you like this flashback review, please like and subscribe or follow me on Letterboxd at RamirezS316. Well, we're in a difficult time in America nowadays for Latinos and Chicanos. We aren't being seen the way we should. We're not being humanized. In fact, we're being hunted. We're being kidnapped. We're being persecuted. And I just hope I can shed light on how Chicanos and Latinos really are. We have tons of culture and stories, and they are just as much a part of the American experience as anyone else in this country. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not the man in the White House, not police officers, not ICE, not any idiot screaming in a microphone. Chicanos are American, and America is Chicano.